Good evening. My name is Peter Casserella, the Executive Director of Fons Vitae, and I'm delighted to greet you this evening for this very auspicious event. I invite you to join me in prayer with John Henry Newman. In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, amen. And therefore, O my dear Lord, since I perceive thee to be so beautiful, I love thee and desire to love thee more and more. Since thou art the one goodness, beautifulness, gloriousness in the whole world of being, and there is nothing like thee, but thou art infinitely more glorious and good than even the most beautiful of creatures. Therefore, I love thee with a singular love, a one only sovereign love. Everything, O my Lord, shall be dull and dim to me after looking at thee. There is nothing on earth, not even what is most naturally dear to me, that I can love in comparison of thee, and I would lose everything, whatever, rather than lose thee. For thou, O my Lord, art my supreme and only Lord and love. We offer this prayer with Newman in this great moment of unity. To you, our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you again for joining us. I want to just begin this evening with words of gratitude to my dear friend and colleague, Timothy Kimbrough, who helped us put this together and was really the creative juices for all of this. Bishop Bauersmith, Deacon Bauersmith, we're very grateful for your presence and the creativity and well, I won't use all the other names that have been used about your homiletic agonistics from earlier today, but we're so grateful for both of you being here and contributing in such an important way to this ecumenical meeting. I also want to highlight the efforts of, on the AHS side, Liz McQuaid, and on our side, Troy Cassine. If you don't know them, they've been working dutifully. Let's give them a round of applause for all the efforts they've done in putting this together. They've been working very hard for months, so thank you, Liz and Troy. So it's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight to conclude these 2 days of an ecumenical celebration of the witness of John Henry Newman. My colleague and dear friend of many years, Dr. Reinhard Huetter. Dr. Huetter is from Lichtenfels in Germany. He's studied and got his habilitation both from the University of Erlangen and taught for 9 years at Lutheran School of Theology, and then came to Duke Divinity School. Dr. Huetter has been very productive in the area of scholarship. He also served after Duke Divinity School at the Catholic University of America, from which he recently retired, and is now our visiting professor of Catholic theology. Dr. Huetter serves in many deep capacities in the church. He's an active member of the International Theological Commission and working on many of their documents and thought processes as the church moves forward on many fronts. His work on Aquinas, not only in the classroom, but Dustbound for Heaven, Explorations in the Theology of Thomas Aquinas, 2012, Bound for Beatitude, a Thomistic Study in Eschatology and Ethics in 2019, Aquinas on Transubstantiation in 2019 are very well known to the students here and all around the world. But I would be remiss in not mentioning his 2020 book from COA Press, John Henry Newman on Truth and Its Counterfeits, a Guide for Our Times. And among the counterfeits that we find there in his work, he speaks of the university as envisioned by Newman, and the empire of desire that is informed by techno-consumerism of today. So that opposition informs that book, and that will be a possible way into the topic for this evening. So without further ado, please join me in greeting our speaker, Reinhard Huetter, who will speak about Newman on God and the university. Reinhard.
Good evening and welcome to all of you for this evening. There was a handout. Troy, do we have a handout for everyone? The handout has been forgotten. Okay. Well, now you're at the mercy of a German lecture of 60 minutes without a handout. Troy wanted you to have the real full experience without the crutch that we create sometimes. So this will be interesting, as I'm realizing now. Oh my, I have to do this thing, which looks ridiculous, but here we go. The irony is, of course, that I'm going to lecture with a heavy German accent on one of the best English prose writers of the Victorian age. You have to bear with me. I can't do anything about that. The lecture is a contribution indirectly to the 100th anniversary of Duke University, the university that has the motto Eruditio et Religio, and that maybe was directly taken from Newman's idea of a university. So that is the background framework, maybe the golden background framework for the whole lecture. So we have a wider context to reflect upon. So today we are commemorating the spiritual, theological, and intellectual legacy of John Henry Newman. His life spanned almost the whole of the 19th century, to be precise, from 1801 to 1890. In his own student days, he was one of the most brilliant undergraduates at Oxford and won a very prestigious fellowship for life at Oriel College, at that time, the intellectually most rigorous of the colleges. He was an inspiring tutor, a patristic scholar of note, and a leader of the Oxford movement that left an indelible mark on the Church of England. Newman was one of the most famous preachers in the Church of England. His collected sermon volumes were bestsellers and earned him a fine amount of money beyond the meager allowance of an Oriel Fellow for life. After October 9, 1845, Newman became England's most famous convert to the Catholic Church. As a Catholic priest and theologian, Newman brought the Confederation of Oratorians of St. Philip Neri to England and prepared indirectly through his writings many theological developments that came to fruition at the Second Vatican Council. In 1879, Pope Leo XIII made him a cardinal, the first English cardinal residing in England since Reginald Pole in the 16th century. Last but not least, he was canonized by Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square on October 13, 2019, so that we now have the joy and honor of calling him Saint John Henry Newman. We commemorate his life and legacy of Saint John Henry Newman this evening within the precincts and close to the very heart of one of the leading research universities of the United States, a university whose official motto is Eruditio et Religio. Hence, I take as the fitting topic for this evening what arguably is Newman's most famous work, next to his Apologia pro Vita Sua and his essay on the development of Christian doctrine, the idea of a university. This book, put together by Newman in its final form under the present title in 1873, originated in lectures on university education that Newman delivered in 1852, about 21 years earlier, in Dublin, as part of the plan and beginning of the founding of a Catholic University of Ireland. The original lectures were intended for a particular audience in Dublin and for a specific purpose. Yet in the modified 1873 version of the idea of a university, we encounter a treatise on university education that Newman intended for a universal audience. And in this very form, the idea of a university has become a classic, as prophetic as uncomfortable, a thorn in the side of all modern universities. Because Duke University's motto, Eruditio et Religio, could have been taken directly from Newman's idea of a university. I put this evening's reflections under the title Newman on God and the University. My reflections stand in a longer line of Christian thought about the nature of the university. I want to remember today, and in this place in particular, two works by Duke faculty members of renown. Stanley Hauerwas's 2007 essay collection, The State of the University, Academic Knowledges and the Knowledge of God, and Lester McIntyre's God, Philosophy, Universities, A Selective History of the Catholic Philosophical Tradition from 2009. Among eminent modern thinkers, John Henry Newman is arguably the most astutely contrarian. He swam upstream all of his life. The idea of a university is, among other things, a prescient critique of all the 20th and early 21st century attempts at functionalizing the university and pressing it into the service of ideological ends foreign to its genuine and arguably original idea. These pseudo-ends have haunted and distorted the modern university, whether those imposed by the modern expansionist nation state, meaning colonialism, the Communist Party program, the fascist state organization of the superior race, the late modern national security state, or the desire-driven and technology-saturated permissive consumer society. The knowledge gained in the late modern research university is arguably a production or making, a techne, that is a means to an end extrinsic to it. The American Association of Universities, the exclusive club of the leading research universities of the United States of America, characterizes a research university as an institution that advances a great variety of expertise to be applied to real-world problems. Cutting-edge research is combined with undergraduate training for such research, often in highly specialized programs. The research university could be called the Baconian University, named after its spiritus rector, Francis Bacon. Newman had this university model in mind when he delivered his original university lectures in Dublin in 1852. Quote, "I cannot deny Bacon has abundantly achieved what he proposed. His is simply a method whereby bodily discomforts and temporal wants are to be most effectually removed from the greatest number," unquote. Nonetheless, being able to fulfill a wide range of material and social desires makes the Baconian University virtually irresistible. Questioning the Baconian University puts the critic immediately under the suspicion of being an enemy of material progress, and with material progress being the one indisputable indication of human advancement, also the putative enemy of humanity itself. Arguably, the late modern research university of the early 21st century is the Baconian University in its, so far, most advanced stage. It has had a stunning global career, so that, in the words of Brad Gregory, quote, "leading scientists and scholars at research universities have become the societal and indeed the global arbiters of what counts as knowledge and what does not in the early 21st century," unquote. Think of our Nobel Prize laureates these days. In the idea of a university, Newman holds up a mirror in front of all late modern research universities. In this mirror, the Baconian University is seen bowing to social, political, and cultural needs and functions, diverted by concerns extrinsic to the nature of the university, The Baconian university betrays the pursuit of education in universal knowledge as an end meaningful and valuable in itself. According to Newman, the idea of the university has morphed into something else, a counterfeit that should receive its own proper denomination, that of the, quote, pan-technikon, unquote. Newman put it thus in his important original fifth discourse on university education from 1852, General Knowledge Viewed as One Philosophy, a discourse he eventually decided not to include in the definitive 1873 edition of the idea of a university. You will find this suppressed discourse only in critical editions of the work, usually in an appendix. Newman puts the matter in this discourse thus, quote, "They consider it a sort of bazaar or pantechnikon, in which wares of all kinds are heaped together for sale in stalls independent of each other, and that to save the purchasers the trouble of running about from shop to shop," unquote. The countervision that Newman develops in the unfolding discourses of his idea of a university is deeply informed by the reforms that Oxford University implemented in the first decades of the 19th century, pretty much immediately before Newman arrived there as an undergraduate. These curricular reforms put the classical profile of Oxford University into even starker contrast with the new progressive utilitarian University of Edinburgh, which at that time was the strongest critic of what they called the backwardness of Oxford University and what it stood for. Newman's countervision has at least one indisputable characteristic. It is provocative. For in it, among other provocative moves, he advances an argument why theology is integral to the curriculum. Mind you, not of this or that Christian university or Catholic university or even Jewish or Muslim university. No, of the university as such. Here is Newman's argument in a nutshell. The heart and center of a university education is liberal education. Liberal education has its end in itself, the cultivation of the mind. Liberal education is a potentially universal education. Hence, no discipline of knowledge may be excluded programmatically and principally from a university curriculum. Furthermore, while it is impossible to embrace more than a limited number of fields of contemporary knowledge in a particular course of studies, liberal education fosters reflection upon the knowledge gained in one subject in relation to other fields of knowledge. This reflective trans and interdisciplinarity makes liberal education a potentially universal education and gives it its particularly scientific, indeed, as Newman puts it, philosophical character. Universal education, however, requires a horizon of transcendence, a horizon that affords maximal interconnectedness, a horizon that affords intelligibility all the way down, hence a horizon that permits the cosmos as a whole to be potentially intelligible. Yet intelligibility all the way down is something for which the cosmos cannot account for on its own. What accounts for intelligibility all the way down transcends the universe and at the same time affords intelligible coherence to the universe. But this transcendent horizon can only be attained, articulated, and reflected upon if theology is an integral component of a university education. Yet what exactly does Newman mean by theology in the context of a university education? And why precisely does he think theology is indispensable for university education? Let's look at this argument a bit more closely. Newman holds it as axiomatic that the idea, and therefore also the term university, is essentially related to universe and universality, Consequently, he argues, quote, as to the range of university teaching, certainly the very name university is inconsistent with restrictions of any kind. A university should teach universal knowledge, unquote. Hence, no subject matter that conveys knowledge is to be excluded from university teaching. Newman is quite insistent and explicit about this point. And there comes the first quote from our non-existent handout. So you have to bear with me. It's a bit longer. Quote, if a university be, from the nature of the case, a place of instruction where universal knowledge is professed, and if in a certain university, so called, the subject of religion is excluded, one of two conclusions is inevitable. Either, on the one hand, that the province of religion is very barren of real knowledge, or on the other hand, that in such a university, one special and important branch of knowledge is omitted. I say the advocate of such an institution must say this, or he must say that. He must own either that little or nothing is known about the Supreme Being, or that his seat of learning calls itself what it is not. In short, it would be a counterfeit. The secular university, by and large, that is, when it is consistent with its self-understanding, insists upon the first alternative. That would be, in Newman's day, the newly founded University of London. Little or nothing is purportedly known or can ever be about what Newman, in the line of an Anselmian and Scotist denomination of God, tentatively and circumscriptively calls the Supreme Being, if such a Supreme Being exists at all. Hence, ideas and beliefs about such a Supreme Being might be studied, ideas that pertain to the anthropological phenomenon called religion, a knowledge-making that belongs to departments of religion. Newman, interestingly, would not be opposed at all to an empirical, historical, literary, and cultural study of and university education in the world's religions. For he would regard such study and education a characteristic component of a liberal education. He has, however, something categorically different in mind when he speaks of theology. By theology, he means, quote, the science of God, or the truths we know about God put into system, just as we have a science of the stars and call it astronomy, or of the crust of the earth and call it geology, unquote. Quite aware that his position has already been controversial in the English-speaking university world outside of Oxford and Cambridge in the 1850s, Newman makes it most explicit that, quote, university teaching without theology is simply unphilosophical. Theology has at least as good a right to claim a place there as astronomy, unquote. In this telling statement, Newman gives us a key for understanding his overall, and I would submit, ever pertinent vision of what the proprium of a university education is. If university teaching without theology is simply unphilosophical, what then would it mean for a university education to be philosophical? Newman gives an answer in his sixth discourse, where he states, quote, the true and adequate end of intellectual training and of a university is not learning or acquirement, in other words, cramming, as we say now, but rather is thought and reason exercised upon knowledge, or what may be called philosophy, unquote. What differentiates a proper university education for Newman from the know-how training in a pantechnicon is thought exercised upon knowledge and upon the interrelationship of all the sciences. Newman states as much quite explicitly. Quote, the comprehension of the bearings of one science upon another and the use of each to each, and the location and limitation and adjustment and due appreciation of them all, one with another, this belongs, I conceive, to a sort of science distinct from all of them, and in some sense a science of sciences, which is my own conception of what is meant by philosophy, in the true sense of the word, and of a philosophical habit of mind, and which in these discourses I shall call by that name, unquote. Developing a philosophical habit of mind is at the core and center of Newman's understanding of a proper university education. It is the full habituation of the intellectual grasp of things through differentiation, comparison, and ordering. In short, genuine intellectual ownership, command, and a keen sense of what one knows, how and why one knows it, and also the limits of one's knowledge. Newman takes this to be what philosophy essentially means. And, as he puts it, quote, science itself is a specimen of its exercise. For its very essence, it is a mental formation. The science is not mere knowledge. It is knowledge which has undergone a process of intellectual digestion. It is the grasp of many things brought together in one. Imagine a science of sciences and you have attained the true notion of the scope of a university. We consider that all things mount up to a whole, that there is an order and a precedence and harmony in the branches of knowledge with one another, as well as one by one, and that to destroy that structure is as unphilosophical in a course of education as it is unscientific in the separate portions of it. We form and fix the sciences in a circle and system and give them a center and an aim, instead of letting them wander up and down in a sort of hopeless confusion, unquote. Excluding theology from the university would be unphilosophical, in that if such a decision be a proper philosophical one, it would require a rational warrant that demonstrates that it is not simply an arbitrary foregone conclusion based on sundry unwarranted prejudices, but rather the consequence of an unquestionable insight and a conclusive argument, and hence rationally justified. Yet the construction of such a warrant requires sufficient familiarity with and critical engagement of at least metaphysics and natural theology, if not revealed theology. Advancing such a warrant will become jejune at best, without the already excluded disciplines around for a serious engagement in the first place. The judgment and dismissal occur in the absence of the defendant. By establishing secularism as a normative criterion for admittance to the university, Newman observes, the university decapitates itself and becomes unable to reflect properly on its own secularist commitments. Yet what is his argument for the indispensability of theology for a proper university education? Newman moves beyond the striking observation that by excluding theology from its curriculum, the modern university simply betrays how unphilosophical it is. For according to Newman, religious truth communicates not only the divine perfections, potentially accessible to reason, unaided by grace, and hence to what we might call philosophical theology, but also divine personhood and agency, that is, divine providence and the governance of the universe. These perfections altogether become a concrete living reality in the theology implicit in the word God, held as a religious truth by all whom Newman calls theists. And now I'll offer a longer quote for the sake of my class on the doctrine of God. I know some people are here, and this is one of my favorite quotes from the idea of a university. You get a theology of God in a nutshell here. Quote, God is an individual, self-dependent, all-perfect, unchangeable being, intelligent, living, personal and present, almighty, all-seeing, all-remembering, between whom and his creatures there is an infinite gulf, who has no origin, who is all-sufficient for himself, who created and upholds the universe, who will judge every one of us, sooner or later, according to the law of right and wrong, which he has written on our hearts. He is one who is sovereign over, operative amidst, independent of, the appointment which he has made, one in whose hands all things, who has purpose in every event, and a standard for every deed, and thus has relations of his own toward the subject matter of each particular science, which the book of knowledge unfolds, who has with an adorable, never ceasing energy implicated himself in all the history of creation, the constitution of nature, the course of the world, the origin of society, the fortunes of nations, the action of the human mind, and who therefore necessarily becomes the subject matter of a science far wider and more noble than any of those which are included in the circle of secular education, unquote. You get the point. This doctrine of God is the de facto alive, this doctrine of God is de facto alive as religious truth in the minds of Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Considered maximally, the divine perfections of personhood and agency are the implications of the God who is sovereign Lord of history, who is able to raise Israel from Egypt and Jesus from the dead, and fulfill all the promises to Abraham and in and through Christ. God is able to do this because he created the world ex nihilo and holds it every instance in existence and transcends the cosmos absolutely, a cosmos in which the dynamic of creation ex nihilo is constantly continuing. Hence, Newman is, of course, keenly aware of the radical limitations of human knowing and speaking when it comes to God. As Janet Soskis put it so aptly in her recent book, Naming God, and as Newman, the patristic scholar, knows so very keenly, quote Soskis, what we grasp when we grasp the classical attributes, one, eternal, omniscient, is not a set of recondite truths about how things are, chez God, but a practice of unknowing, not baseless conjecture, but a reasoned response to what we know of the godness of God, whom we know to be creator of all that is, unquote. Even if considered only minimally, this religious truth, alive in the minds of Jews, Christians, and to a large degree also Muslims, must have a significant impact upon any education that claims to be potentially universal. Newman states famously, quote, admit a God and you introduce among the subjects of your knowledge a fact encompassing, closing in upon, absorbing every other fact conceivable. How can we investigate any part of any order of knowledge and stop short of that which enters into every order? All true principles run over with it. All phenomena converge to it. It is truly the first and the last. Granting that divine truth differs in kind from human, so do human truths differ in kind from each other. If the knowledge of the Creator is in a different order from knowledge of the creature, so, in like manner, metaphysical science is in a different order from physical, physics from history, history from ethics. You will soon break up into fragments the whole circle of secular knowledge if you begin the mutilation with the divine, unquote. But Newman goes further and makes the bold claim that religious truth is not only a portion but a condition of general knowledge. To blot it out is nothing short of unraveling the web of university teaching. He's pushing now. How does Newman make good on this claim? He does so by constructing a reductio ad absurdum argument by way of an a fortiori analogy. Let's see how that works. First, Newman establishes the fundamental relationship between objective truth and scientific inquiry. He does so by insisting upon a version of epistemological realism that still informs much of contemporary natural science. And if you hear echoes of Peirce's pragmatism in the background, you're not completely wrong. There's a convergence. Truth is the object of knowledge of whatever kind. And when we inquire what is meant by truth, I suppose it is right to answer that truth means facts and their relations. All that exists as contemplated by the human mind forms one large system or complex fact. Viewed all together, the sciences approximate to a representation or subjective reflection of the objective truth as nearly as possible to the human mind, unquote. The subject matter of theology, God, allows the understanding of the rest of reality as a created whole, as a universe, and consequently, all knowledge that can be gained as essentially interrelated, and therefore as an integral component of universal knowledge. In a second step, Newman develops the first part of an analogy that in an uncanny way anticipates powerful current initiatives in contemporary research universities, namely to recast the curriculum in light of a normative evolutionary naturalism. Reason, volition, freedom, and spirit, Geist, must be studied as at best aspects of the phenomenon of consciousness that is an emission from or a mere epiphenomenon to physical and biochemical processes in light of which they must ultimately be accountable and possibly predictable. Listen to Newman's 19th century version of this quote. Physical and mechanical causes are exclusively to be treated of. Volition is a forbidden subject. A prospectus is put out with a list of sciences. We will say astronomy, optics, hydrostatics, galvanism, pneumatics, statics, dynamics, pure mathematics, geology, botany, physiology, anatomy, and so forth. But not a word about the mind and its powers, except what is said in explanation of the omission, unquote. History, political science, economics, literature and language, art history, musical theory, and last but not least, philosophy, with the exception of logical positivism, formal logic, and the philosophy of mathematics and of the natural sciences, can happily be eliminated from university studies in the curriculum. Quote, Newman, henceforth man is to be as if he were not. In the general course of education, the moral and mental sciences are to have no professional chairs, and the treatment of them is to be simply left as a matter of private judgment, which each individual may carry out as he will, unquote. Well, replace the physical mechanistic framework with a biological evolutionary one in Newman's illustration, and matters sound only all too familiar. There's a noted philosopher of science who has repeatedly argued that the humanities are a waste of time and that a future undergraduate training should focus exclusively on the natural sciences and on the methodological reflections of a materialistic philosophy of science. Newman anticipates such a proposal in his own example, quote, our professor, after speaking with the highest admiration of the human intellect, limits its independent action to the region of speculation and denies that it can be a motive principle or can exercise a special interference in the material world. He ascribes every work, every external act of man to the innate force or soul of the physical universe. Human exploits, human devices, human deeds, human productions, all that comes under the scholastic term of genius and art, and the metaphysical ideas of duty, right, and heroism. It is his office to contemplate all these merely in their place in the eternal system of physical cause and effect. At length he shows, this professor, how the whole fabric of material civilization has arisen from the constructive powers of physical elements and physical laws, unquote. Newman's prescience is impressive. Reductionism, whether that of mechanistic physicalism or that of evolutionary materialism, is an all too simplistic principle. In the third step of his reductio ad absurdum argument, Newman completes his analogy with an a fortiori conclusion. While not falsifying his professor's definitions, principles, and laws, ignoring the reality of human reason and volition as proper motive causes, would still issue into a radically false view of the things which he discussed, the erroneous view being his considering his own study to be the key of everything that takes place on the face of the earth. If this is true, a fortiori, the ignoring and consequent dismissal from university subjects of a reality infinitely superior to human reason and volition as motive causes would have much graver distorting consequences. And finally, Newman drives home the blade, quote, "Worse incomparably, for the idea of God, if there be a God, is infinitely higher than the idea of man, if there be man. If to blot out man's agency is to deface the book of knowledge on the supposition of his agency existing, what must it be, supposing it exists, to blot out the agency of God? If the creature is ever setting in motion an endless series of physical causes and effects, much more is the creator. And as our excluding volition from our range of ideas is a denial of the soul, so our ignoring divine agency is a virtual denial of God. Moreover, supposing man can will and act by himself in spite of physics, to shut up this great truth, though one, is to put our whole encyclopedia of knowledge out of joint. And supposing God can will and act of himself in the world which he has made, and we deny or slur it over, then we are throwing the circle of university science into a like or far worse confusion." Unquote. On the supposition that God exists, the exclusion of the all-important fact from the circle of universal science can only result in the omission and distortion of truth. The supposition that God does not exist is a philosophical tenet that cannot be proven conclusively, and hence can neither constitute a first principle nor a conclusion of any of the academic disciplines that belong to the secular university's circle of sciences. For Newman, ideological atheism is as unphilosophical as it is unscientific. How would Newman's reductio ad absurdum argument fare in the present late modern research university? It would, of course, hardly find a serious hearing, and hence would fail in its rhetorical appeal. The argument, nevertheless, still carries through, for one can make a reasonably strong case that the faculties of the contemporary secular universities are roughly but discernibly divided along the lines of the Kantian antinomy between determinism and freedom. Predictably, the defenders of determinism are by and large at home in hard sciences, primarily the biosciences, not those subatomic physics. The defenders of freedom from all natural constraints, self-inventive and self-constitutive freedom in the humanities. The defenders of determinism are typically, though with noteworthy exceptions, embracing a post-humanist outlook, especially in the biosciences. They regard the human being as a highly developed animal bent on maximizing the success of its species, of which the natural sciences and their technological application are currently the most decisive factor. The most articulate defenders of a radical notion of human freedom are increasingly, though with noteworthy exceptions, embracing a transhumanist outlook. And now I have to come to another thinker because it's late in the evening and I have to kind of get you going. In his very late notebooks, penned between 1886 and 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche, he has to come in this evening, who was born in 1844 when Newman was 43 years old and who died 10 years after Newman in 1900 at age 55. He seems to have anticipated both the post-humanist, and the transhumanist implications of a purely secular utilitarian knowledge production. And I give you a quote, a memorable quote from his late notebooks. And here it comes. There exists neither spirit nor reason, nor thinking, nor consciousness, nor soul, nor will, nor truth. All are fictions that are of no use. There is no question of the subject and the object, but of a particular species of animal that can prosper only through a certain relative rightness, above all the regularity of its perceptions, so that it can accumulate experience. Knowledge works as a tool of power. Hence, it is plain that it increases with every increase of power. The meaning of knowledge here, as in the case of good and beautiful, the concept is to be regarded in a strict and narrow anthropocentric and biological sense. In order for a particular species to maintain itself and increase its power, its conception of reality must comprehend enough of the calculable and constant for it to base a scheme of behavior on it. The utility of preservation, not some abstract theoretical need to be deceived, stands as the motive behind the development of the organs of knowledge. They develop in such a way that their observations suffice for our preservation. In other words, the measure of the desire for knowledge depends upon the measure to which the will to power grows in a species. A species grasps a certain amount of reality in order to become master of it, in order to press it into service. Unquote. If Nietzsche is right, the university as a humanist enterprise of education and universal knowledge is quite passé. What Nietzsche predicts is the species-relevant pantechnikon. A species grasps a certain amount of reality in order to become master of it, in order to press it into service. This is the post-humanist program. And when we include human nature itself into the reality to be mastered, we have the transhumanist program. Consequently, Newman's analogy has lost nothing of its relevance. Rather, with uncanny prescience and precision, Newman perceived the radical implications hidden in the Baconian university that Nietzsche eventually would lay bare. While we are busy ushering Newman, the all too uncomfortable prophet, out the front door of our late modern research universities, assuring him in most cordial terms of the indubitable humanistic value of his idea of a university, which presently is, most regrettably, utterly unfeasible, Francis Bacon, a long-time university tenant, quietly opens the back door and beckons Friedrich Nietzsche to enter in. Newman's analogy seems to confront us with a fundamental alternative. Either the university is nothing but a species-relevant pantechnikon, to be it as the tool of mastering nature by pressing it more and more into the service of the human species, or be it as the launching pad for mastering human nature itself, the technical and genetic optimization of the human being into some cyborg, super, or transhumanity. Or university education presupposes the possibility of universal knowledge and aspires to universal education as an end in itself, as cultivating the human mind, and as such, as a contribution to a more perfect form of existence, human existence. In this latter case, theological knowledge unavoidably bears upon other knowledge. Newman's vision links the question of the nature of the university and of a university education to the question of the nature and end of the human being, quite obviously, to the question of the nature of human flourishing, and to the ways of realizing a more perfect form of human existence. Newman's idea of a university presses upon us the question, what kind of university can meaningfully encourage and enable the university education that is expansive enough, not expensive enough, expansive enough to include the inquiry into these questions of a fundamentally philosophical and theological nature. We know that the Baconian Pantechnicon, by a foregone conclusion, has already brushed aside questions of this kind as unscientific and indeed as a waste of time. For an inquiry guided by such philosophical question does not contribute to any tangible, that is, measurable knowledge making. Such an answer will, of course, convict the late modern research university only of its tacit Baconian ideological commitments. Newman would regard such a university as decapitated, headless, as unable to reflect philosophically upon the ideology that drives its implicit normative judgments, as well as its de facto operations. If nothing else, Newman's vision serves at least as a provocative reminder that the only thing that can save the university from the reductive and in the end detrimental distortions of philosophical naturalism and from its Nietzschean genealogical deconstruction is the discipline that allows for the widest possible scope of the inquiry into truth. Only with theology as an integral component of the arc of university disciplines will that arc achieve the widest possible scope. Will the university remain open to a maximum of interrelated and complementary sciences? Will a university education remain in all areas of knowledge essentially philosophical? And will university knowledge as an end in itself be intelligible and desirable? I should clearly state at this point, it was indicated but maybe not as clearly as it should be, that by opening up the horizon to maximal, that is authentic transcendence, by introducing the creator-creature distinction, the most fundamental distinction in the order of existence and thought, theology as science of God, presupposes and is constituted by this very distinction. Hence, while being like any other university discipline, theology is ever more unlike other university disciplines. Newman was aware of that. While in one sense theology fits into the whole construction of disciplines and topics a university curriculum treats, it is after all a human mode of inquiry, reflection, knowledge, and articulation that makes up theology. It, on the other hand, does not easily fit into the arc because its central topic is precisely God and everything else in light of and regard to God, who absolutely transcends everything created, visible and invisible, hence the whole cosmos. In this sense, theology is more unlike any other field of study, that all in principle pertain to aspects of creation, to everything within the cosmos and to the cosmos as a whole. In short, theology has an analogical relationship to all other disciplines, and that difference in similarity and similarity in difference must be felt at all times from both sides, lest theology become accommodated into a version of religious studies and God into a mid-size, shiny object, a manageable idol, a no God, in short, a human projection. The articulation of Newman's full awareness of the fundamental difference that is embedded in the similarity between theology and other disciplines finds its most extensive articulation in his parochial and plain sermons, given at St. Mary's, University Church in Oxford. Here Newman puts on display the fundamental truth that any true knowledge in this unique science called theology is utterly self-involving, and Newman's life is a striking witness to the fundamental fact that in theology, sagacity and sanctity are the two sides of the same coin. And now you might think this is finally the end of the lecture. And it almost is. Check knows it is not quite yet, because we haven't talked about the Divinity School yet. So we take a last step, the home run now. We have to turn to the Divinity School. We can't leave that behind. And to that we are turning now, finally. And so finally, we must consider the obvious, namely that the vision Newman unfolds in his idea of a university is especially provocative for a divinity school located within a late modern research university. Is a divinity school, not unlike a pantechnicon, a mere conglomerate of essentially unrelated disciplines that receive a transitory, practical, and purely extrinsic unity by way of the extrinsic purpose they serve, the preparation of persons with certain skills, competencies, and techniques necessary for ordained ministry in various Christian denominations and for social and political advocacy in a variety of contexts? Or does a divinity school receive its interior unity from the interior unity of the discipline of theology, that in turn receives its intrinsic unity from the unicity of its subject matter, God? On this supposition, might it not be appropriate to conceive of theology as a potential whole? For the medievalists among you, a totum potestativum, as the scholastics would say. That means a whole that enters into its individual parts in different ways and to different degrees, but is always present in all the parts with its complete nature, so that all integral parts are theology all the way down. Is the inherent end of theology the contemplation of the truth of God and of all other truths intrinsic to or related to God? Hence, does theology have an intrinsic end, the cultivation of the mind with the truth of God, and then subsequent practical effects that flow from this intrinsic end as an excess or surplus, so to speak, effects that first and foremost would include formation for ministry and preparation for advocacy, for social and political justice, and by the way, with increasing urgency also, eco-justice, of course? Or is theology primarily, or maybe even exclusively, practical divinity, understanding itself instrumentally all the way down, a finishing school, training in a variety of skills and practices, hence a form of sophisticated techne, yet foregoing the claim of interior unity and coherence, as well as the claim to anything that could be called knowledge of God in the proper sense, let alone the reflective status of a science or philosophy in Newman's sense. What would theology need to look like as a differentiated, yet overall coherent academic discipline that contributes to the whole of the university and stands in constant lively exchange with other university disciplines, bearing upon them, and other disciplines like physics, quantum field theory, astronomy, neuroscience, or paleoanthropology, bearing upon theology? What would a divinity school need to look like that understood theology to be integral to liberal knowledge, knowledge that is an end in itself, contributing to the cultivation of the human mind? This is for us to reflect upon. To switch gears, what in addition would a divinity school look like if, together with campus ministry, it made present to the whole university that power of the Holy Spirit through grace that brings about what Newman took a liberal university education to be intrinsically incapable of bringing about? The conversion of the human heart. This is the opposite moment to cite one of the most famous passages of the idea of the university, because that pertains in a specific way to the ministry of the church within and through a divinity school. Quote, "Knowledge is one thing, virtue is another. Good sense is not conscience, refinement is not humility, nor is largeness and justness of view faith. Philosophy, however enlightened, however profound, gives no command over the passions, no influential motives, no vivifying principles. Liberal education makes not the Christian, not the Catholic, but the gentleman. It is well to be a gentleman. It is well to have a cultivated intellect, a delicate taste, a candid, equitable, dispassionate mind, a noble and courteous bearing in the conduct of life. These are the connatural qualities of a large knowledge. They are the objects of a university. I'm advocating. I still illustrate and insist upon them. But still, I repeat, they are no guarantee for sanctity or even for conscientiousness. They may attach to the man of the world, to the profligate, to the heartless, pleasant, alas, and attractive as he shows when decked out in them. Taken by themselves, they do but seem to be what they are not. They look like virtue at a distance, but they are detected by close observers and on the long run. And hence it is that they are popularly accused of pretense and hypocrisy. Not, I repeat, from their own fault, but because their professors and their admirers persist in taking them for what they are not, and are officious in arrogating for them a praise to which they have no claim. Quarry the granite block with razors, or moor the vessel with a thread of silk, then may you hope with such keen and delicate instruments as human knowledge and human reason to contend against those giants, the passion and the pride of man. Unquote. According to Newman, it is only the presence of the gospel, the power of the Holy Spirit, the church through word and sacrament, active within a university, that brings about the conversion of the human heart. Theology as a contemplative and speculative discipline, integral to the full spectrum of liberal learning, is powerless to achieve this on its own. Theology and the church within the university are for Newman thus like the two focal points of the geometrical shape of the ellipse. Theology contributing as a field of knowledge about God to the universal knowledge characteristic of an authentic university that aims at perfecting the human mind. The church, through word and sacrament, addressing the human being in the existential order, aiming at the conversion of the heart. Incidentally, this intimate correlation between theology and the church, between mind and heart, was at the core of Newman's vision regarding the vocation of the college tutor. Newman implemented such an integral tutorship at Oriel College in 1822, when he was just 21 years old. It was innovative at the time, and at the same time was a ressourcement in an older integral model of intellectual and simultaneously spiritual formation, the medieval model. Despite its remarkable success and its surprising popularity among Oxford undergraduates, Newman was not permitted to carry this model forward at Oriel College. Yet the vision returned in his idea of a university as the proper way of how theology and the church are present in a differentiated unity within the university, in short, as nothing else than eruditio et religio, theology and living faith. A distinct echo of Newman's vision could be heard at Duke Divinity School during the late 90s and the first years of the new millennium, when the official and programmatic motto of Duke Divinity School was the love of learning and the desire for God, echoing a famous book by Jean Leclerc on the monastic culture of learning, a topic on which incidentally Newman wrote his highly instructive Benedictine essays. And so it turns out that Newman's idea of a university is no less provocative regarding a divinity school than it is regarding the wider university. And there's nothing better to do on the day of his commemoration than to pick up his provocation and think anew through the authentic meaning of eruditio et religio. This provocation serves as a powerful antidote to the permanent self-distraction, dissipation, and amorphous, unsettled general busyness that characterizes too much of our lives, as they are profoundly yet often quite imperceptibly affected by the overuse of all forms of digital technology, and now especially by the latest delegation of the human mind to the Sunday deliveries of machine learning, apologetically euphemized as artificial intelligence. One of the best concrete alternative practices still consists in obeying the mandate tolle lege, pick up and read. In our case, within the confines of a late modern research university, to pick up and indeed read the idea of a university. Yet with a philosophical habit of mind, the formation of which is intrinsic to proper university education. And so, for last time, I will give indeed the almost last word to Newman. The enlargement of mind consists not merely in the passive reception into the mind of a number of ideas unknown to it, but in the mind's energetic and simultaneous action upon and toward and among those new ideas which are rushing in upon it. It is the action of a formative power, reducing to order and meaning the matter of our acquirements. It is a making the objects of our knowledge subjectively our own, or to use a familiar word, it is a digestion of what we receive into the substance of our previous state of thought. And without this, no enlargement is said to follow. There is no enlargement unless there is a comparison of ideas one with another as they come before the mind and the systemizing of them. We feel our minds to be growing and expanding then when we not only learn, but refer what we learn to what we know already. It is not the mere addition to our knowledge that is the illumination, but the locomotion, the movement onward of the mental center to which both what we know and what we are learning, the accumulation, the accumulating mass of our acquirements gravitates. And therefore a truly great intellect, and recognized to be such by the common opinion of mankind, is one which takes a connected view of old and new, past and present, far and near, and which has an insight into the influence of all these one on another, without which there is no whole and no center. It possesses the knowledge not only of things, but also of their mutual and true relations. Knowledge not merely considered as acquirement, but as philosophy. Unquote. And now you know why ChatGPT is not the answer. You cannot achieve what he is referring to here by way of putting a question to ChatGPT. It's a capitulation to precisely what he's talking about here. Make the reading of Newman's idea of a university a part of the enlargement and perfection of your mind, and you might discover, grasp, and appreciate a deeper understanding of this university's motto, eruditio et religio. And to those who by now are left with a lingering feeling that Newman's idea is precisely that, an idea, a beau ideal that exists only in the delivery of his striking discourses, but can actually never be fully realized in any extant university, even under ideal circumstances. That is, under the unlikely presupposition that all faculty and all students have an imperial mind, as Newman was said to have had. My response is analogous to the response Socrates gave to Glaucon at the end of Plato's Republic. After Glaucon realized that the city whose foundation has been established in speech does not exist anywhere on earth, here is the recommendation Socrates gives, quote, "But in heaven perhaps a pattern, a paradigma is laid up for the person who wants to see and found a city within himself on the basis of what he sees. It doesn't make any difference whether it is or will be somewhere, for that person would mind the things of this city alone and of no other," unquote, Book 9 in the Bloom translation. In the end, maybe Newman simply invites his audience and the readers of his idea for university to mind the things of this ideal university alone and of no other, to act in any university in which we find ourselves as students and as faculty, as if we had the paradigma, the pattern, in short, the idea of a university within us. And therefore, in every respect of our university life, simply would mind the things of eruditio et religio. Let us do so, for in any university, this is the best way to commemorate and honor Saint John Henry Newman. I thank you for your attention, your very long attention.
Before we conclude, I just want to thank one more time Father Timothy, Liz McQuaid, and all the students and staff and faculty who are here with the Anglican Episcopalian House of Studies. This has been a brilliant and beautiful 2 days of celebrating the life and witness of Newman. And as was said last night, we conclude this year's celebration, but we look forward to an annual event. So we have great hopes for the future. So our last task is to thank our brilliant speaker, Professor Huetter. Please join me in thanking him.